Right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to ANH Academy Week 2022. My name is Elena Martinez, and I'm the technical manager for this session, chaired by Stella Nordhagen. Thank you so much for taking part in ANH 2022. We look forward to an interesting and interactive session today. So thank you so much, and over to Stella to begin the session.
Great. Thanks very much, Elena. And thanks to everybody for joining us online today. I hope you've all been enjoying ANH Academy so far. I know that I have. And if you haven't yet, then you will be soon, because we have an excellent set of speakers lined up today who will be talking about the topic of strategies for and evaluations for nutrition-sensitive interventions. And this is going to cover a range of different exciting topics related to things like new methods for collecting data, interesting dashboards for displaying data on programmatic costs and benefits, as well as some new results from different multi-sectoral nutrition interventions. As Elena mentioned, we'll be doing all of the questions at the end of the session, but definitely don't hesitate. As soon as a question pops into your mind for a speaker, stick it in the chat and we'll collect those so that we can get to them all at the end of the session. So without further ado, I'm very happy to introduce our first speaker, who is Yaoche Nuve from the University of Georgia in the US, and he will be presenting on consumption side separability tests of agricultural households. Over to you.
So my name is Yaoche Nuve. I'm a PhD candidate in Agicon at the University of Georgia. So this project is with my advisor, Professor Ellen McCullough. Consumption side separability test of agricultural household. So in this project, we are looking at the question of how to improve nutrition for smallholder farmers in general. More specifically, we are looking at the question of whether policymakers seeking to improve nutrition, for instance, through agricultural intervention, should rely on markets or not to do so. So if the answer to that question is yes, that is policymakers can rely on market to improve nutrition. One possible way to do that is by lowering food prices, by raising or improving crop productivity in general. Another possible way is by raising smallholder farmers' income. By improving the profitability of their activity, their crop production. But if the answer to that question is no, policymakers cannot rely or trust agricultural market to improve nutrition. So it is better to promote the production of more diversified and more nutritious crop for farmers to grow. So to help us understand which case best apply to our data, we rely on the canonical farm household model, which simply states that if agricultural markets normally work well, farmers make their production decisions based only on market information. For instance, the price of seed, the price of fertilizer, not on their food preferences. And then they produce and use the generated profits from their farm activity to purchase whatever food they want on the market. So understanding whether this assumption holds or not help us to identify the best policy option to improve nutrition, depending on whether we face the case of a well-functioning market, a poorly functioning agricultural market. So we developed an empirical test to understand whether smallholder farmers choose agricultural markets or not. So another way is a test for whether policymakers can trust or rely on agricultural market to improve nutrition. So the intuition behind the test is that, for instance, if a household change the land allocated to a specific crop, that change should reflect or should affect the food intake for that specific crop only through the total farm profit effect, not through any other effect. So to test this hypothesis, we use 6 food consumption waves of the Nigerian LSMS dataset, which is a publicly available World Bank data. We estimate a demand system over several food groups, and then we use the estimated demand parameters to calculate a ratio. So normally, if market function well, our calculated ratio should be equal to 1. So let's take a look at the result. Before moving to the result of our test itself, let me show you some basic summary statistics. So this figure shows the budget shared on food and non-food group for our sample of study. So Q1 represents the income group, the lowest income group, and Q4 represents the highest income group. As you can see here, we find that low-income households spend more of their income on grains and cereal products relatively to high-income households, as you can see here. And also consistent with the literature, you find that wealthier households spend more on non-food goods relatively or as compared to poorer households. So these figures show our result or summarize the result of our test, of our market failure test. So the blue dot we have here represents the ratio we calculated. As I said before, this ratio should be statistically equal to 1. And as you can see here, normally we expect all the blue dots to be on the dash line, but this is not the case here. So this simply implies that we face market failure in our sample of study for the Nigerian smallholder farmers. And we ask ourselves whether this result differ if we consider only households with farm income only. But as you can also see here, the blue dots are far away from being equal to 1. And then the next question we ask ourselves is whether the result differ for farmers who are far away from market as compared to farmers who are not. And the red dot here represents the group of farmers who are far away from a nearest local market. But although we find that on average, the issue of market failure is more pronounced for farmers who are far away from nearest local market, we did not find a statistically significant difference between the two subsamples. So depending on whether the farmers is far away or not from nearest local market, the issue of market failure still exists in our sample in general. So in conclusion, we find evidence that Nigerian smallholder farmers face market failure and that their food consumption is driven by what they produce, what they grow. So going back to our initial question or our original question, which is should policymakers trust markets to improve nutrition? And given our finding, we propose this policy intervention or agricultural intervention. First, it should be to improve nutrition. Improving agricultural market is a priority. It's a priority so that agricultural productivity growth can better contribute to improve nutrition. And second, it will be good to promote a nutrition-sensitive agriculture such that agricultural production can improve household diet, but also increase farm profit as a whole. So thank you for your attention.
Excellent. Thank you, Yoache. And you were right on time. So that was very impressive timekeeping there, as well as a very substantively interesting presentation as well. We'll hand over next to a different topic. Amy Margolies with the International Food Policy Research Institute in the US will be presenting on the development of a dashboard to aggregate the relative costs and benefits of nutrition-sensitive programs. Over to you, Amy.
My name's Amy Margolies, and I'm presenting today on aggregating the benefits and costs of nutrition-sensitive interventions. This work in progress is part of the SEAMS Nutrition Consortium with IFPRI and the University of Washington. And apologies if I have to move a little quickly through the slides. The rationale behind this work is to address existing limitations of economic evaluation approaches. We know that nutrition-sensitive program designs are very diverse. These programs act as platforms to reach different target groups and have very different activities. So this presents a challenge to value those benefit streams in a standardized way. Current models to value benefits, such as the Live Save model, cost effectiveness, and cost benefit approaches, tend to rely on deaths or disability averted, and this is based primarily on stunting cases averted. We know that nutrition-sensitive programs often don't see impacts on stunting. So thus, when you look across, for example, this actual suite of 8 projects, you only see a benefit for one project that impacted stunting. But it raises the question, what about other projects that had significant impacts on other outcomes? So there are currently no aggregate indicators for the performance of nutrition-sensitive programs and really not much data on costs. So in previous presentations at ANH, our group has presented some work on the costs and the results of economic evaluations of these different types of programs. But we also wanted to think through how can we potentially develop a benefits aggregation model for programs that don't rely on one indicator or one impact pathway and assessing those benefits across various impact pathways. So what would this look like? So conceptually, we wanted to think about a benefit score that's an aggregate combining different benefits across different impact pathways. So here, for example, you see not just that one project performing, but many different projects performing across different impact pathways in terms of impacts on, for example, agricultural production diversity, diets, and other outcomes such as women's empowerment. So we want to think about how to compare these programs, especially programs that target different populations with different activities. To do so, we went back to the ANH Value Chain for Nutrition framework that originally came out of the Technical Working Group on Evaluation, and thinking through how these programs leverage common impact pathways. What are the common intervention design features and common indicators? These pathways tell us where to look for the common indicators. So for example, on the left, you see a suite of projects. They have different project components, but they're trying to impact these common pathways. And then we want to think about what are the benefits and costs that they result in. So as a beginning of this process, we did a very thorough review looking at intervention designs and program impact pathways across 21 different interventions pulled from the Gates Agriculture and Nutrition Grants, as well as many different IFPRI interventions that have been evaluated. We looked at mapping these impact pathways to the nutrition-sensitive demand and supply framework to identify common features and indicators. So we found that looking across all these different projects, all these programs measured indicators across different domains, but not every intervention used the same indicators. So everyone is measuring something, but not everybody is measuring everything. But looking at these different pathways, there was consistency in some of the indicators and measurement, and that's essentially what we wanted to look for. So we had to think through first, did the intervention have an impact, but taking into consideration those multiple indicators, impact pathways, and different program designs. So to handle this heterogeneity in design and measurement, we created a couple different scores to look at this. The first is essentially a count score, a very straightforward binary score for each impact pathway to capture any impact on outcomes within these impact pathway buckets, we're calling them, and then adding those scores across the buckets. We then needed to think about what was the size of that impact, so looking at effect sizes, actual impacts from trials and evaluations, and then thinking through what potential impact could this intervention have had if everything had been measured. And we're thinking through that because not the impacts on other age groups might not be measured. Most of the projects we screened did not have a measured value for each category, and we know these projects often have impacts not just in one target age group, but more than one because of the effect of the intervention on the household. So in terms of the count score, it's very straightforward, just a qualitative score. Is there an impact on any indicator, yes or no? And these, on the left side, you see the supply bucket broken down into the intermediate pathways of knowledge, practices, and impacts. And you see these various indicators. So essentially, we took the suite of interventions and we're just doing a very simple binary score. And going forward, scoring the other impact pathways as well of demand and enabling environment. So here you are able to see how this actual suite of interventions that we used scored in these count scores. So this addresses the fact that there are multiple impact pathways that the projects are impacting. And to emphasize, this is not a biological or a scientific score. It's just a scoring tool to say, basically, was there an impact or not on these impact pathways and the intermediate steps on those pathways. So it's giving us more information to understand relative performance of interventions across these impact pathways. So you can already see which projects affected more the demand pathway or supply, and essentially it's providing more information. However, it doesn't tell us the size of that impact, and we also need to still consider those multiple indicators, pathways, and designs. To do kind of a proof of concept to explain how we moved forward here, we're going to use diet diversity as an example. So we used the most commonly measured indicator by pathway from our review, and the diet diversity score was the most commonly used measure of impacts on diets. So this is an example. We then took the actual true effects. So we're pulling results from trials that were screened and extracted that data and put it into a dashboard. So we're basically looking at what is the sum of the impact on the dietary diversity scores. And this is just across 3 target groups, the under 2s, the 2 to 5s, and mothers. And then looking to see how these same projects performed. So it's allowing you to look at different interventions that target different groups and just showing you how these projects performed on this diet diversity score, which was that common indicator. However, this doesn't capture the potential impact that the projects could have had. So we wanted to do some potential scenarios to fill that gap. So essentially what we do here is for those projects that did have an actual impact on the diet diversity scores, you impute values where missing in the target age groups, because essentially most of these projects were not measuring in the other groups. And so you are using values from meta-analyses of the literature of the impact of agriculture nutrition programs on child diet diversity and for women's diets, and imputing those so you could see the range of potential impact that those projects could have had. And you do the same and you extend to the other impact buckets, so looking at production diversity and anthropometry, and getting to the point where you're doing a breakdown of potential effects by these buckets. So what effects could these projects plausibly have had if they had measured all the groups? And we're using weights or parameters from the literature for these various pathways. And then we can also break that down by impact pathways, so demand and supply pathways. So essentially it's giving us more information on these different interventions. Ultimately, what we're trying to get to is a dashboard that's user-friendly, and it's helping the users understand what the evidence means. We have a lot of variation in performance in the types and sizes of effects, so essentially this would allow users to explore those project rankings by different scores, the count score effects, and eventually bringing in costs as well, which will be pulled from our group of economic evaluations of nutrition-sensitive interventions that we're conducting. So it's not so much a horse race, but diving deeper into the data and helping users and program designers understand potentially the impacts of different design choices on performance as well. So clearly there's a lot of limitations here. There's incomplete data regardless of the method that you use. There are differences in importance in the benefit categories. We have the challenge of distilling these very complex program designs into more simplified comparable measures. But I think it provides an opportunity to give more information on relative performance of very different types of programs and new methods to examine these diverse interventions, and hopefully stimulates or motivates standardization of some of the evaluation approaches and measurement to allow for more comparison in the future. And eventually we want to look at determining the implications of design choices on effectiveness. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Amy, for that really clear presentation on an important topic of how to aggregate the many different types of benefits that come from nutrition-sensitive programs. Next, we have up our third speaker, who is Winnie Bell from FHI Solutions, specifically the Intake Center for Dietary Assessment. And Winnie is going to be presenting today on Index 24, which was designed to improve collection of quantitative dietary data for use in multi-sectoral agricultural nutrition health programs. And she'll be sharing with us some evidence from Vietnam and Burkina Faso. Over to you, Winnie.
Super. Thank you very much for that introduction, and to the previous two speakers for great presentations. So as noted, I am with FHI Solutions, and I'm presenting today on behalf of my colleagues who are listed here. However, note that these colleagues and this work was carried out primarily by Tufts University with partners in Burkina Faso and Vietnam. And I'm happy to be sharing it with everyone today. So the Index 24 Dietary Assessment Platform, which some of you may have already heard of or been exposed to, as I just noted, was developed at Tufts University at the School of Nutrition Science and Policy under the guidance of Dr. Jennifer Coates with support from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So I just want to acknowledge that right now. And the platform is currently in the process of being transferred to Intake, the Center for Dietary Assessment at FHI, with the objective of it being the new host and the future home to ensure long-term sustainability. I'm just going to provide a brief overview of what Index 24 is, and then dive into the accuracy and cost effectiveness results from our studies. So the platform is composed of several components. The first one is the Global Food Matters database, which is a centralized, open, accessible repository of dietary reference data, including food composition databases, standard recipes, food descriptors, probes, portion conversion factors. And it's been designed to enable data sharing among users of Index 24, as well as people who aren't using Index 24. This system links with the Index 24 mobile app, and currently the data that are in the Global Food Matters database have been uploaded, have been compiled and uploaded by users of Index 24. So the Index 24 mobile app component, the second portion here, is a quantitative 24-hour dietary recall app, which uses the multiple pass method. It's designed to be interviewer administered and to work on an Android device. And it can work offline, of course, and up to 4 languages per survey. Both of these components are linked together in the analytical reports section of the platform, which combines the food consumption data and links it with the food composition and conversion factor information in order to calculate daily intakes of food quantities and nutrients, as well as to identify any gaps in the food composition and conversion factor data. So the objective of this series of studies was to assess the accuracy, cost, and cost effectiveness of this tool compared to pen and paper using the benchmark of weighed food records. So these are the publications that I'm going to be presenting on today. And I'm just going to, because of time limitations, I'm going to be pretty brief in this presentation, but happy to discuss more. So the partners for this work were, as I mentioned, in Vietnam, we work closely with the National Institute of Nutrition, and also in Burkina Faso with Institut National de la Statistique et de la Démographie for 3 kind of related but separate studies: feasibility, validation, and cost studies. So the main objectives here were firstly to assess the relative accuracy of Index 24 compared to pen and paper using weighed food records as the benchmark. Secondly, to understand the impressions of Index 24 compared to pen and paper 24-hour recalls through focus group discussions and also cognitive debriefing with the respondents. And then thirdly, to assess the total and relative costs and cost effectiveness of Index 24 compared to using pen and paper for a 24-hour recall. So just in brief, the design of the study, the 2 arms, arm 1 and arm 2, is where we had randomized respondents to be either administered the the 24-hour recall with pen and paper or with index 24. And each of these groups of respondents received a weighed food record enumerator the day before the 24-hour recall to collect information on what they consumed. And then in the third study arm here, we have what we referred to as a sort of, quote, naive respondents, in that they didn't receive the weighed food record the day before and only responded to a 24-hour recall. And this third arm, the data from the third arm, were only used to assess the time per interview required of pen and paper compared to 24-hour recall. So for the validation study, the methods that were employed, from a data collection perspective, we had the two different modalities for the 24-hour recall, either index 24 or the pen and paper. We used weighed food records as the benchmark, and then had a series of focus group discussions. The outcomes of interest are listed here, and the analyses that the analytical approaches we used for planned development plots, of course. We conducted a difference in difference type analysis with equivalence tests, where we compared each 24-hour recall modality to the weighed food record, and then the difference of those two arms to each other. We looked at individual percent error and the cost effectiveness. For the cost study specifically, we took an activity-based costing approach. And so this work was carried out alongside the validation study, of course. So to do this, we first defined all the different categories of costs and then costed out the activities required to conduct the 24-hour recall survey with either index 24 or pen and paper. We defined all costs from a societal perspective, meaning that all the costs were included. All costs were included regardless of who incurred them. And in addition to the primary cost analysis, we also modeled some costs under three different scenarios. One was the level of use of data from the Global Food Matters database. So we modeled different assumptions at 25% use of existing data, 50% or 75% use. We also had a scenario in which we looked at whether the study was conducted by all local personnel versus having involvement of international researchers. And then thirdly, scaling up our results to national scale studies. So larger sample sizes beyond the 200, nearly 300 respondents in each of our studies. So I'm just flashing this table, but because there are a number of tables, I decided to go ahead and just summarize the main results for each country. So this is what you have here. And a couple of things I just wanted to highlight was, in Vietnam, we found that index 24 and pen and paper 24-hour recall both performed very well compared to the weighed food record. We found equivalence across all nutrients except for with vitamin A. At the individual accuracy level, 32% of index 24 respondents and 26% of pen and paper respondents had energy intake within 10% of the weighed food record. And on average, interviews took 39 minutes, and we're about 5 minutes faster using index 24 than pen and paper. And for Burkina Faso, we saw a little bit more variability in our findings. So here, index 24 and pen and paper were statistically equivalent with weighed food record for select outcome measures, but not for all. We did see divergence, for example, with energy and carbohydrates. In terms of the individual level accuracy, we found that 21% of pen and paper and only 13% of index 24 respondents were within 10% of the weighed food record. So this was a bit lower than in Vietnam. And on average, index 24 took 4 to 7 minutes and was still about 4 minutes faster than using pen and paper. So just to highlight, differences across country, but our differences across countries, although our objective was not to do kind of a comparison between Burkina Faso and Vietnam, just highlighting side by side. So as far as findings from our cost analyses, I'm again just showing a smattering of the results here. In Vietnam, on a cost efficiency basis, the total economic cost of the 24-hour recall was $755 compared to $820. So at a per respondent level, this was a savings of $64. We see, slight difference in Burkina Faso, where it was still less with index 24, but only $6 less. And as I noted, because, well, the second table here is highlighting the Global Food Matters database scenario modeling results. And so, as I said, right now, the Global Food Matters database is really at the nascent stage. So, and when we conducted the cost studies, we were the first users of it, of course. So we anticipate, however, that as future users of Index 24 expand, that the existing data will allow for more borrowing and also lower relative costs with use of the platform. And what we see here when we modeled the results was that 25, 50, and 75% of use of leveraging the existing dietary reference data, that there was a cost savings between $136 and $277. And we see a similar trend with Burkina Faso. So just very quickly, a couple of conclusions and takeaways. Our validation and cost study findings found, I'll just go like this, overall, reduced total costs using Index 24 compared to pen and paper. We identified further potential for cost and time savings when leveraging existing dietary reference data from the Global Food Matters database. Overall, accuracy of the results was as good as or better than pen and paper when using Index 24. From start to finish, we found a shorter survey cycle, again, compared to Index 24 compared to pen and paper, less respondent burden, so with an equal or lower time per average interview, and based on feedback from enumerators and respondents, and improved user experience. So if you're interested in learning more, we'd love to hear from you and also to discuss during the Q&A session. And again, this work has been supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and carried out by Tufts University. So thank you all for your attention.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Winnie. I think that's a great example of how we can use technology to improve the collection of dietary data, which is something that we all rely on quite a lot in our work. So we can always use more of in cheaper and more efficient fashions. So thanks very much for that. Participants, if you have questions for Winnie, please do stick them in the chat and we'll get to them after the next two presenters. And now it's time for our fourth presenter, who is Marlène Eby of Goal Global, based in France. And Marlène will be presenting on nutrition impact and positive practice, learning from the design and implementation of a multi-sectoral behavior change approach, supporting under nutrition prevention and treatment across the health and food systems in 5 sub-Saharan African countries. Over to you, Marlène.
Thank you, Stella, for the introduction, and thank you for the opportunity. So today I'm going to share goal learning on from the design and the implementation of a multi-sectoral social behavior change approach, which is called NIP, which stands for Nutrition Impact and Positive Practice. NIP was designed by Goal in 2012 as a gender multi-sectoral social behavior change approach to try to fill a gap in the potential in the nutrition prevention and treatment continuum of care. And the NIP approach involved a group of female and male caregivers, and as well as community leaders that meet separately over a cycle of 12 weeks to engage in 3 main activities, which are practical social behavior change sessions, micro-gardening, as well as participatory cooking demonstration. And these activities are complemented by building of hygiene enabling facilities, as well as food processing, preservation, and storage techniques. So on the website of Goal, you can access a nice video that will show you on the ground how the NIP approach work. And to date, Goal has reached NIP across Niger, Sudan, Uganda, Zimbabwe, and Malawi. And we have reached over 31,000 female and male caregivers, and there are over 100,000 household members. So the purpose of this review was that we conducted across multiple years, so between 2015 and 2019. So across those 5 countries that I've just mentioned, was really to try to look at the effect of the NIP program in the treatment and the prevention of moderate acute malnutrition, both in children under 5 and in pregnant and lactating women on one side. And on the other side, the objective was to generate some evidence and learning on moderate acute malnutrition treatment and prevention through multi-sectoral programming. And we use a mixed method involving both quantitative analysis and qualitative analysis. So regarding the quantitative analysis, we analyze over 19,000 data and looking at more than 25 indicators, focusing on knowledge, behaviors, and anthropometry, with a focus on children under 5 years old and pregnant and lactating women. And from the qualitative side, we engage through semi-structured interview and focus group discussions with more than 200 stakeholders, including female and male caregivers, but also the facilitators of the NIP groups and other strategic key stakeholders like Ministry of Health staff. And the focus of this qualitative review was really to look at process implementation, but also experience from the participant, as well as motivators and barriers to positive behavior adoptions. So for the quantitative analysis, we did do some retrospective cross-sectional analysis. As I said, focusing on children under 5 and pregnant and lactating women, and we perform as well some statistical analysis. So in terms of results, when we want to look at knowledge, behavior, and practices, what we have found across these 5 sub-Saharan countries was that for most of the 25 knowledge and behaviors indicators analyzed across care, feeding, hygiene, sanitation, and microgardening practices, most of them had improved during the NIP program. So that's mean during a cycle of 3 months. And all of them were sustained up to 12 months after the end of the program, because we did also collect some follow-up data after graduation from the program among a subsample of the participants. So all of the behaviors were sustained up to 12 months after the program, except microgardening maintenance. And then on this graph on the right side, you can see just an example focusing on the minimum dietary diversity among children under 2 years enrolled into the NIP program. And you can see from the aggregated data across those 5 countries that at baseline, only 67% of children under 2 were receiving the minimum dietary diversity. And that has increased to 85% when they were exiting from the program. And it was maintained up to among 80% of these children up to 12 months after they exited the NIP program. And from the qualitative assessment, we have found that building and maintaining microgardening and latrine were the most challenging activities for the participant across those 5 countries. And in relation to the latrine construction, the main challenges were around assistance for construction, so in terms of labor and materials. And in relation to microgardening, main challenges were related to access to water, especially during the dry season, although we are talking about home gardening activities or community garden activities. And the second challenge was related to the sustainable access to the seed after the project ends, although they were trained on harvesting and reusing the seeds. But despite all those challenges, the general experience was quite positive, not only for the caregivers directly involved into the program, but also for the whole community. Looking at the treatment of moderate acute malnutrition in children and pregnant lactating women. So as I said, we were collecting anthropometric data, and what we found across those 5 countries is decrease of the rate of moderate acute malnutrition. For example, in children from 56% at admission, so baselines when they were enrolled into the program, to 3% at graduation, so when they exited the program. And this corresponded to a 95 cure rate. And we found a 68% cure rate for pregnant and lactating women. In terms of strength and limitation for this review, so starting with the strength, we analyze and review data from aggregated data from 5 sub-Saharan countries with different contexts, so to get really a range of the potential contribution of NIP in various contexts. We analyze an extensive data set. So looking at a range of indicators, not only focusing on knowledge, but also on practices and anthropometry. We did collect some post-graduation, so post-graduation data up to 12 months after the end of the program. And the data overall was of good quality. And the qualitative assessment provided us with very valuable insights from both the female and the male caregivers and their community as a whole. However, in terms of limitation, there is an absence of a control group for both the children and the pregnant lactating women. So we were not able to do any comparison or comparative analysis. And then also the 12 months post-graduation data set was considerably lower compared to the baseline, because we were first focusing on a sample of all of the participants, and secondly, because of loss to follow-up. And as a result, this has restricted the type of and the depth of quantitative analysis that we could perform on the 12-month post-graduation data. And finally, these results do not reflect the potential impact of COVID-19 on the program, because we are talking about community-based program. And we know all the impact of the COVID at community level, at individual and household level, especially on nutrition as well, because this data, the data presented is really from 2015 up to December 2019. So in conclusion, this review has provided some evidence basis on the community-based treatment and prevention of moderate acute malnutrition using the NIP approach. And we are expecting to get more evidence from the one study, which is an RCT involving the NIP approach conducted in Uganda in partnership with Tufts University and as part of the consortium. However, based on the findings, we really want to encourage countries with high burden of malnutrition to test and tailor the NIP approach to their context, because this result is from various contexts across sub-Saharan Africa. And we'll keep using these findings to pursue advocacy for the scale up of the NIP approach. And finally, we use these years of implementation and the finding and learning from this review to design and start piloting in Niger and Uganda an integrated approach that we call System for Nutrition, so S4NUT. So looking more broadly at a system approach and building up on social behavior change, but also market system development. So making the link with the first presentation from Yaoche, nutrition sensitive market system development, but also financial inclusion, because we know that most of the people that we are working with, they live within systems where they derive not only their food, but also their livelihood or income. So that's it. Thank you very much. And I'll be happy to answer to any question you may have.
Great. Thanks very much, Marlene, for that really clear presentation on the results of the NIP approach. I particularly appreciated how you looked at effects that persisted after graduation from the program. I think that's a really important thing to examine, but oftentimes it's not done. So thanks for sharing that. And participants, please do put questions for Marlene in the chat. Now it is time for our last speaker, who is Joe Piper from Queen Mary University of London. And Joe will be presenting on the Saharan Toolbox, a comprehensive assessment of school-aged children's growth, cognitive and physical function in rural Zimbabwe. So Joe, over to you.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks for the introduction. Yes, so I'm delighted to present today for Imana. And as was mentioned, I work at Queen Mary and linked with Jitambo Institute for Maternal and Child Health Research in Zimbabwe. And then we work in partnership with the Zimbabwe Ministry of Health. And particularly the stuff I'm presenting today is mainly funded by Imana, but we also have funding from Wellcome Trust. I'm a Wellcome Trust Global Health Research Fellow. And then also some work from Thrasher and National Institute of Health as well. So really what I'm going to show in this talk is the idea of the sort of life course approach to global health. And then the brief discussion of the SHINE trial, which some people may have heard about already. some of the new tools that we're developing in the Saharan Toolbox to understand kind of school age growth and development, some initial results looking at the whole cohort, and then really our sort of future plans and where sort of Imana metrics comes in within those future plans, and hopefully the idea of sort of planting the seed for future collaborations. So as I'm sure you're all aware, the life course approach is an idea that across the whole general sort of life course, then there's different risk and protective factors that can either promote growth and development or else stunt children. So beyond just sort of linear growth, also looking at brain or cognitive function, mental health, body function as well. So for example, kidney function and then later hypertensive risk. And obviously a lot of the data and a lot of focus is on the first 1,000 days, which is probably this early part of the chart, because that's seen as when these trajectories are their most sensitive to intervention, so the most kind of plastic time. And that was when the SHINE trial randomized pregnant mothers to either extra water and sanitation. So we work in rural communities, and this was an extra latrine, tippy-tap field washing stations, and sort of water treatment and hygiene modules, or extra nutrition for the babies. And so between 6 and 18 months, this was a lipid-based nutrient supplement. And what we're coming back within the SHINE cohort is then doing a whole range of tests at school age to really get an idea of, kind of what impact these early life interventions have had, but also kind of to understand school age, which is often described as the kind of missing middle. So a lot of global health and nutrition interventions target sort of under 5 outcomes and also sort of adolescent outcomes. But that gap between, say, 5 and 14 is a really kind of fruitful area to sort of understand as well from that side. So here's the SHINE trial. We work in rural Zimbabwe in Midlands province. And this was the SHINE trial, as I mentioned. There was a standard of care arm. It's a 2x2 cluster randomized trial. There were nutrition intervention, infants and young child feeding, water and sanitation intervention here in green, and then a combined arm as well, nutrition and water and sanitation. And so what we're aiming to do, and what we're doing, particularly working in Shiruguri province here, is between 4 and 6 visits a day. And then we're aiming to measure 1,000 children born to HIV negative mothers, so so-called HIV unexposed. And then a separate kind of side project, but is also still really interesting, is looking at those children born to HIV positive mothers. So thanks to the success of prevention mother-to-child transmission of HIV, there's a large number now, about 15 million children in Southern Africa born to HIV positive mothers who are HIV negative. But these so-called HIV exposed but uninfected children seem to be very vulnerable to stunting and to poor cognitive development. And at the same time, early results from SHINE suggested that they actually grew more and that they also had an impact on their cognition. So we're aiming to measure 300 of those as well. So we're totally in total measuring 1,300 children. So what about the Saharan Toolbox? Well, this, as I say, is designed to a whole range of measuring tools, looking at, first of all, quality of growth. So beyond sort of straightforward height and weight and other measures of anthropometry, we're looking at bioimpedance. So using that to get a measure of lean mass index, skin fold thicknesses for peripheral and central fat, knee heel lengths to get an idea of body proportions. And then physical functions, so we use grip strength and broad jump to give us an idea of muscle strength, and the shuttle run or beat test to give us an idea of the cardiovascular fitness. And then cognitive function, we are using the Kaufman assessment battery for children. So this is one of these big westernized tools that we've done some adaptation to, but it has been used widely across Africa. And then we're also looking at measures of literacy and numeracy with a word reading arithmetic test. Some executive functions, so some tablet-based computer games where we look at sort of plus EF. And kind of looking, the plus EF is a tablet-based tool that looks at sort of what's called cognitive flexibility, and that's highly predictive of later adult function. And then fine motor, we're looking at finger tapping, which is just literally where you time how fast the child can tap their fingers, as I'm showing. And then some other questions looking at social emotional development and overall function. While all of that is going on, At the same time, we're measuring a wide range of other sort of confounding factors or impact factors, such as measures of adversity, food and water insecurity, child adversity, nurturing, so measures of discipline, the child-parent relationship scale, as well as the house demographics and socioeconomic status. So all in all, this will be quite a rich data set that we hope to develop future metrics within. And this is how it looks in the field. So we use a wide range of community health workers or village health workers. We sensitize the whole community across the district. And then we liaise with the families and community health workers to then come and take detailed consent and assent. And they've already been sensitized by the community health workers. And so here we are measuring the child on one of the Kaufman tests, and the dad is watching, and we're interviewing the mum under the tree. So at all times, the child and mum or child and main caregiver can see each other, but they can't hear the sort of mother's answers and things from that side. And so I'm going to show you some preliminary results from just over sort of 600 children, and of which some of which are HIV positive, but we're still blinded to the intervention arm at the moment. So I'm just going to show you sort of general trends that we're observing within our data. And the first thing to say is that really, when we look at sort of quality of growth, there is an impact even when we divide by the height squared measurement of bioimpedance. It does seem that kind of taller children generally have more lean mass for their height, even when you divide by sort of height squared correction term. And so there is this general signal coming through that generally taller children have developed more sort of physical function as well. And I'll come on to that. So here, for example, if you do a standardized physical score from the running, and here you can see the child in the background running with the data collector. So the data collector runs a few times to provide pacing. And for our field measurements, we use a Bluetooth speaker and a 20-meter builder's tape to run back and forth, marking out the course based on where the household is. And so you can see here that taller children generally do better across all the tests, particularly when you standardize them. And so what's interesting with that is if we look a bit more detail, we can look at the quality of growth. And we see that lean mass is highly associated, or lean mass index is highly associated with total physical score. But interestingly, looking at sort of total skin folds or skin fold thicknesses as a proxy of fat mass, we really see that's not the case. In fact, if anything, fat mass slightly hinders your sort of total physical function. This is a birth cohort. Children were born into the SHINE cohort. So we know their early life birth weight as well. And we also know that birth weight is highly predictive of lean mass. And again, we see that signal coming out now. So you can see that actually birth weight is predicting your physical score at 7 years as well from that side. And then, interestingly, if we go a little bit further forward to the sort of 18 months milestones, which was the original primary endpoint for SHINE trial, you can see again that 18 months growth is highly associated with physical function at 7 years. So we're really seeing this kind of early trajectory effect in our data so far. What about cognitive function? So here's a child doing one of the cognitive tests within the Kaufman. So which one of these patterns goes here to make the complete pattern? You can see the child's got it right. And obviously this is all happening during COVID, so everyone is wearing scrubs and masks. And again, I talked about the different aspects of cognitive function that we're measuring before. So briefly, executive function, sort of academic function, social emotional, fine motor, and then the sort of overall cognitive function or cognitive processing. And you can see these different domains of cognitive function here. So these are kind of logic, short and long-term memory. We're getting quite a nice kind of sort of Gaussian distribution of different function. Here's another Kaufman test, a slightly trickier one about which one goes here to make the complete story. So it's actually the man putting up the flag. And then, sorry, this one's just off the picture. Then one goes there to put up the flag. And you can see again that height and head circumference, so current anthropometry, current growth, is also highly associated with how these children do in their Kaufman assessments overall. But even so, there's still a very small but a significant effect of birth weight. So you can really see that actually very early life and antenatal, as well as sort of early life growth, is having some association with later cognitive function, but it's not nearly as strong. And maybe that's probably because obviously we have a wide range of schooling exposure and a whole range of other kind of adversities that could affect cognitive function. And similarly, the same for sort of early life growth at 18 months. So from an Omana side, what we're doing really much is still sort of aim one. We've developed the Saharan Toolbox, and we are measuring the 1,000 children in particular that are born to HIV negative mothers. And we're really sort of coming sort of about 3/4 of the way through that project at the moment. And then what we want to do is, particularly from the standard of care arm, develop these metrics, these kind of shorter metrics, because the downside of all these measurements is they take about 4 hours in the field or so to do. Yeah, so I just wanted to finish up just to say that we'll be developing the metrics and applying them to the whole thing from that side, and then really want to develop and work with a whole range of donors and funders to kind of get further grant outputs from that side, to kind of really hopefully that these metrics will really fill that gap within school age, which is highly predictive of adult function. At the same time, it's still an age where you can put in extra, kind of interventions. So just to summarize, we've got, I've talked about the Saharan Toolbox, talked about how really we've developed this kind of strong signal of function to growth, and really looking at, kind of the future. We really want to develop these field-ready metrics, as well as understand a whole range of the sort of exposures within this very rich data set. And finally, I'd just like to thank all the SHINE parents and children and caregivers, and particularly my supervisor, Andrew Prendergast. I'd be happy to take any questions. Thanks very much.
Great. Thanks very much, Joe. Really interesting to see some new focus on that missing middle of school-aged children, and also to be looking at, I think, a much broader range of different types of metrics and assessments than we often evaluate within nutrition-sensitive programs. So really interesting work. And now we have about 15 minutes for Q&A, and we have a couple that are kind of already teed up that have come in through the chat before. So I'm going to ask a couple of those, and then we'll give time for more to come in. So first question is to Amy. And the question is, can you elaborate more on the calculation of the effect score and how exactly you measured the size of the effect in a standard way across different projects, especially with projects that may have had very different sample sizes?
Sure, that's a great question. And we had to move rather quickly through the slides. So yeah, one of the first steps in the whole process of conducting this work was basically a screening process of existing trials and evaluations. So we went through and used a series of prerequisites to include interventions for scoring. So basic criteria such as they must have both agriculture and nutrition activities, a clear objective to support agriculture and improve nutrition. They must have rigorous evidence of impact, but it's okay if they have different program designs or platforms, because that's kind of what we were trying to get at. So part of this, it actually was going alongside a meta-analysis that we were working on, looking at the impact of nutrition-sensitive programs on diet diversity. So it kind of complemented quite well. So we were extracting this data from the published studies, including the effect sizes and confidence intervals, and we only considered those that were significant, and then we standardized the effect scores. And then we were using that standard continuous score, which was the diet diversity score, that we also pulled through from that review process of looking at the impact pathways and the most common indicators across that suite of evaluations to select the indicator. And of course, as I mentioned before, none of the indicators are perfect, and we're kind of limited by the current suite of evaluations and interventions that are out there in the literature. But I think as we move along and we have more information, and also bringing in information on costs, this will help build out kind of the idea behind the dashboard, hopefully.
Excellent. Thanks, Amy. And the next question is for Winnie. Winnie, in your measurement experiment, did you ever overlap data collection, WFR versus index 24 versus PAPI, in the same respondent? If so, how did you prevent contamination of respondents' answers, as they might have been informed by one of the treatment methods?
Great, and thanks for that question, that clear question, Ellen. So the study design was that every respondents were randomized into either the index 24 or the pen and paper arm of the study, and respondents in each of those arms received the weight food record. So nobody received weight food record, index 24, and pen and paper, but they all had the weight food record as the benchmark. We had a different set of enumerators who were trained in conducting the weight food records, who spent the day with the respondent on the previous, on the 24 hours prior to the 24-hour recall. I think one thing that we were concerned about was the sort of priming effect of having a weighed food record before the 24-hour recall, because of course, if you have somebody following you around, not only are you thinking more about what you're eating, but you're also watching it be measured and kind of also probably changing what you're eating as well. Ultimately, though, because the objective of this study was validation, we were interested in the relative differences. So we weren't after, is this the absolute truth in terms of what people are consuming? And the validation literature, around dietary assessment methods has typically used a standard approach. There's been a little bit of research that I'm aware of by Elaine Ferguson and I think others that goes back like 20 years to see the extent to which a priming effect might play a role in shifting people's ability to remember what they reported, so on and so forth. And the literature that I'm aware of has shown that it doesn't have a big impact. Again, since both 24-hour recall arms of Index 24 and pen and paper received the weighed food record, we would expect the effect of the weighed food record to be the same on both of them in terms of kind of affecting how respondents are answering the questions in the 24-hour recall. So. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Winnie. And next question is for Marlene. It's from Helen. I was interested to see the program duration was 12 weeks, but evaluation was 12 months. I was wondering if you or participants felt that 12 weeks was long enough. And if it were scaled up even further or adopted as policy, would this program be run as a one-off intervention of 12 weeks or with a view to continual or periodic intervention over time?
All right, so the NIP cycle is 12 weeks. It means that the group of caregivers and community leaders are engaged into the activities over a cycle of 12 weeks. But it doesn't, it also means that after that cycle, you can start a new cycle, right? So over a 1 year period, you can do several cycles into your area of intervention, depending on your target, your available budget, and a lot of parameters as well. Because, for example, during the agriculture intensive period where people are engaged in agricultural production, most of the time we do not run the groups because they are just busy with the field work. But the way we approach it, so over that time frame, so we evaluate each cycle, so several cycles across countries, across different areas, and then each group, from each group, we select a subsample of participants, and we keep following them up for 12 months from the time they exit the cycle. So that's the time frame of follow-up, right? Yeah, but it's staggered over time, over region, over countries. But that's the way we are monitoring and collecting our data. And in terms of policy adoption, yes, in Sudan, the NIP approach was adopted by the Ministry of Health as one of the nutrition preventative approach. So it has been formally signed off. We have a completely set of toolkit and training in Arabic in Sudan. And our country team is supporting the rollout of the NIP approach through other organizations interested in testing and trying the approach.
Great, thanks, Marlene. And next question for Yoache. And I know this was already discussed a little bit in the chat, but I thought it was a really interesting discussion that a lot of people might be interested in hearing more about. So it'd be nice to bring it out in voice for those that haven't been monitoring the chat. But could you talk a little bit about transaction costs? How were those accounted for in your work? How might they explain farmer behavior? And also what might be some of kind of the implications of transactions cost for different types of policy interventions related to nutrition?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Ellen, for the question. Yeah, transaction costs are definitely one of the reasons why separability assumption generally fail to hold. So one thing we try to do in this specific work project to account for transaction costs or to test the importance or the extent to which transaction costs play a role in market failure is by using how far the farmer is from nearest local market. For the distance to or the geographic access to foods, to local food markets. So this is one way we try to account for transaction costs, but we did not find a significant difference in terms of whether the farmers is far from market or not. So in general, our finding is that farmers do not trust market in terms of where to in terms of from a nutrition perspective, farmers do not trust market. So if we want to take it to a policy perspective in terms of how to improve nutrition, one possible way is to improve market condition, agricultural market condition, of course, to help farmers to sell their product or their produce at good prices, to have access to profitable agricultural market. The other way also is, okay, let's suppose we face a market failure situation. So in that case, I believe it's better to have farmers to produce like some nutritious crops that they can, with the perspective of the goal that they can eat what they produce. And like Ellen raised that point, for instance, nuts, producing like nutritious crop that they can produce to improve their diet. So these are the two main policy implications from our study. If you have any question, any other question or discussion point, I'll be happy to talk about.
Great, thank you, Ache. Very, very clear and well thought out ideas there. And now we have about 5 minutes left in the session. And so I wanted to turn a question over to Joe. So Joe, you have a very comprehensive toolkit of different types of assessments for looking at school-age children. I'm curious, having done all that work looking at the different tools that exist and putting them together in a toolbox and testing them, what do you feel are kind of the biggest remaining gaps in terms of different types of methodological assessments for this age group?
That's a good question. What are the biggest gaps? So I think, so probably assessing growth first, I would say that at the moment, we don't have a true understanding of what the best sort of measures of growth are. And one of the questions is actually, how much does height truly affect, or head circumference as a marker? Like, how much do these simple anthropometry markers really relate to child function? And I suppose that relates to the second biggest gap, really, which is about cognitive function. I think that is such a tricky topic because there are so many different tools out there, and this is also a field that is moving very fast. So the traditional sort of pen and paper, like the Kaufman, that these a lot of training, often proprietary, it is just out of reach of most programs. But there are a lot more sort of tablet-based tools and a lot more, kind of development within that area in early child development, but also moving on into sort of more mid-child. And so I think that that's probably the two biggest gaps, I would say, understanding growth a bit better, and that sort of fat and lean mass. What is the right amount? We all need some fat mass, we all need some lean, but no one really knows what proportions and what that means. And secondly, really the understanding and measuring of cognition and its effects and things like executive function on later life. There does seem to be, from my work, quite good understanding in some ways of physical function, in that the 3 tests we did, there's been quite a systematic review on that, and it seems to reflect reasonably well. If people wanted to use those 3, I think they're reasonable from that side. But again, all of that literature comes from sort of high income settings. So very little has been done in sort of low income settings. But yeah, that's my thoughts anyway.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Joe. And I must say, some of the methods you presented look like they're actually really fun to implement in the field.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone seems to enjoy it. I think the data collectors, I enjoy training it, and yeah, the child really enjoys it too. So yeah, it's fun as well, which is important. Like you can't get a good measurement. Yeah.
Yeah. and rare. Sometimes we have our 2 or 3 hour long interviews and nobody's enjoying those by the end. So great to have some fun methods in there too. So we are nearing the end of our session here. So I just wanted to thank all of the speakers for their excellent presentations today. It was a really diverse snapshot of the different things that are going on in this field in terms of measurement and assessment. So really nice to see all these different types of work, and all of them were very clearly presented. So thanks to all the presenters for participating today, and thanks also to the audience for joining us.
Thank you so much, Stella. And again, I want to echo that, a big congratulations and applause for our presenters. And thank you so much to Stella for your excellent moderation.